Now, the seventh stanza gives us two things. All right. So the first one is, all right, it tells you, okay, this is your world. You have a sky, a blue sky. Then there's you, human being, and you live in a world that's like this. Your world is a blind man squatting on the road. So what does that mean? Right? So, um, while the sky above you exists, it's also colored blue. But you live in a world that doesn't allow you to see that it's blue. First, because you're blind. Second, because you're squatting. So, what does that tell us? It mostly talks about man's limitations, right? So the man lives, he exists. There's a world and then there's a sky, um, but living in that kind of world isn't enough for the human being. He has to know that the sky is blue. But the thing is, we are forever, the human being is forever limited by his humanity. Because sometimes there might be things that are beyond a human being's scope. So what do you do then, right? So you have limitations. There are certain things that are there, but some parts of the thing that exists is unreachable to you forever because you are a human being, right? So first, there you go. It makes us aware of our limitations, right? The second thing that it does for this particular stanza is in the first statement, the sky is blue. Okay? So while it tells us that the sky exists, it also gives us a color. And color is a category. What does a category do? It pins something down, limits it, boxes it, and makes sure that it stays in that category. So it's still a completely human thing to do. Right? So both are human things. One is the limitation of our knowledge, of us knowing things. The other one is the human being's propensity to always want to pin certain things down, right? But when you get to the eighth stanza, it talks about seeing beyond what is there, seeing beyond the blueness of the sky, and seeing beyond the blindness of the man. So what does it mean if this were a discussion on faith? Yeah, it talks about human beings need to define things. Like, in order to know things, in order to believe that something exists, first we look for proof. And then the second, we always look for a category to pin it down. What is God? Who is God? Is he a man or a woman? Which God is truer? The Buddhist God, the Catholic God, the Islamic God, which God is true? All right, so we have all of these questions, and for some people, their faith lies on getting concrete answers to those questions. But Rumi, the persona here, is saying that you have to go beyond that, right? Just because you can't pin the idea of God down doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. So essentially, that's the kind of faith that is that this persona is calling for. You have to understand that things about God, things of divinity, are not always comprehensible by the human mind. There are certain things that people can know. There are certain things that are beyond the comprehension of the human mind. But just because you can't grasp all of them doesn't mean that you shouldn't believe. All right, so you have to see beyond man's uh, limitations and accept and believe that something exists just because even though you cannot pin everything about it down, right? So that's the kind of faith that's being called for here. Now, if this were to turn into a discussion of love between lover and beloved, so romantic love, it's it's a lot similar to how, you know, how when we were kids, we sorry, I'm not even sure if if this is popular during your time, but when we were in, I guess, grade school, sometime during that time, so those are the 90s. uh, we would usually fill out slam books. Is it called slam book or slum book? I forget. But those are like little notebooks that you had to, you would write your name, your age, and then answer silly questions like, who is your crush? What is your favorite color? Define love. All right. So during that during those times when people got to define love and you were essentially teenagers, filling this out, the answers there were all silly. You would get stupid abbreviations like uh, Italy, I trust and love you, or Japan, just always pray at night, right? So there's that, and then some would say love is indefinable, right? As a way to get out of the idea of having to define love at what, let's say, 12 years old or 13 years old. Um, but essentially, those people who wrote that love is indefinable, is correct, according to this poem by Rumi. Because in order to believe the existence of love, you have to get over the human propensity to want to always define things and know things in all its complexity, and know everything before believing that it exists. Because you can't do that you cannot do that with love. So both faith and love are too great for the human mind to grasp. But just because we can't grasp it in its entirety doesn't mean that we should stop believing that it exists. So understanding your smallness and the whole part of it eventually leads to the ninth stanza here, where you have the persona mentioning that a great soul hides, like Muhammad or Jesus, moving through a crowd in a city where no one knows him. And um, when you have someone saying that, if a soul as great as Muhammad's or Jesus's can um, can hunker down and move through a city without needing to be recognized, like the great people that they are, you can do that to yourself as well. You can look at yourself and say, I am only human, and these are my limitations, and I accept it. And as I accept it, I go beyond it and say that, yes, even if my mind cannot grasp faith and love, I still believe that they exist, right? So it also is important to note how Rumi mentions Muhammad and Jesus and affords them equal status. This is why Rumi is greatly loved by a lot of people with different faiths, because, and it's not just for Muslims and Christians as well. He's also loved by Buddhists and Hindus, because the way that he talks about faith is very universal. It's accepting of all kinds of religions, all kinds of faith, all kinds of people uh, in the cultures. And this is one example where you get Muhammad being inclusive with the different faiths. Right now, when we get to this particular stanza, to praise is to praise how one surrenders to the emptiness. The idea of surrender comes up again. And when we talked about it last with one of the earlier stanzas, um, it alludes to the idea that um, be, in order to properly believe in God, it calls you to surrender yourself to Him or to your idea of God. And in this part, though, it talks about a different kind of surrender. It talks about surrender um, in a sense that to properly praise someone, in order to properly mm, glorify someone's God's name, you need to let Him into your life. You don't need to go into too many particulars about a faith's traditional way of doing things, but as long as you let Him into your life and take over everything, essentially surrender, then that's the best way to really praise God, to just let Him into your life. And in in the context of romantic love, this also surrender, letting someone into your life, then translates to vulnerability. It means letting your walls down enough to really let someone into your life. And it simply doesn't mean, making them part of your everyday life and texting them, hello, good morning, and then they're part of your daily routine. It's not just that. We're talking about um, the emotional walls that somebody puts up. And I guess when you get older, you get you put up more and more and more walls because you've learned enough. Somebody hurt you, so now you have to protect yourself. Make sure that you keep something for yourself. Make sure that at the end of it all, you're still a dignified human being. So somewhere along the way, you learn to put up walls. But in order to properly love someone, you have to let your walls down, and those are excuse me, that's a particularly sorry, that's a particularly scary thing to do, to be vulnerable with someone and risk yourself getting hurt, and allowing them that much access to your internal life. That's that's particularly scary, I guess. But again, it calls to a, a great kind of love. When you love someone like you would love your God. All right. So, all right. Let's. So yeah. Okay. So let's continue now with the next stanza.